So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last session of this long and stimulating day of discussion about the different dimensions of social cohesion, its role in development, about how we should think about the next step, about measurement strategies. Thank you for bearing up with us through the tech glitches. So my name is Marine Gassier, and I work on social cohesion here at the World Bank within the Social Sustainability and Inclusion Unit. You've heard from quite a few of us. And I'm here with Nessa Kenny, who is a senior program manager within the Peace and Recovery Initiative at Innovations for Poverty Action. Lisa Inks, who is the acting senior director for Peace and Governance at Mercy Corps. And Siaka Milogo, we've heard from you at the beginning of the day. You're the country director for Niger and Burkina Faso at Mercy Corps. So we've planned and organized this day together, our three organizations. And now for the next half hour or so, we are going to try and tease out some of the main messages emerging from the discussion and highlight some of the way we may be able to combine our expertise and collaborate in the future, hopefully. So I propose to do so in the following way. I'm going to go over a list of questions I've collected throughout the day, and I'm going to first turn it over to the panelists here to address the questions that speak to them the most. Then I'm going to turn it over to the people who are still with us online. And if you're online and you would like to join, you can do so in two ways. You can either type your question in the chat and Irina will read it out to us, or you can raise your hand and then Irina will call on you. And then lastly, we'll turn to you in the room to see if you want to either answer some of those questions or you have any concluding remarks or observations. So I guess I want to start with a fairly open question and ask if there is anything that you have learned today that has changed your priors or that made you think about social cohesion in a different way, or anything you are particularly excited about. Well, I'll start with one example from me. I really enjoyed hearing about the mini barometer from CRS, and also the idea that something that was initially a facilitation tool became a measurement tool, because I think we draw this barrier between intervention and measurement, but we've heard a lot throughout the day about the both positive and adverse effects you can have through measurements. So that's something that's really interesting to me. It'd be great to talk a little bit about the challenges of scaling up some of the intervention you've talked about. Some of them require a lot of facilitation, and that can be hard to scale up because it's costly, because it's hard to maintain standards of quality. But not all intervention require intense facilitation. So what does this mean for how we scale up? Do we prioritize certain type of intervention, certain groups? To me, this was connected to this point that came up several times today about integrating social cohesion intervention into other interventions that are meaningful and that are in demand for the beneficiary, like vocational training or training on how to navigate the bureaucracy, because those interventions have a greater chance of getting scaled up, and there might be some economies of scale too. It'd be great to touch also on the long-term effects and some of the social cohesion intervention. How do we make sure that the gains achieved in intergroup relation or in the quality of mechanism for dispute adjudication, how do we make sure that these gains are sustained? And how can we know whether or not they are sustained? We've talked about the cost of measuring long-term effects. And so to me, this touches on two things. It's how can we make sure through the intervention that we build local capacity, not just the capacity of the implementers, but of the communities themselves in a durable way. And second, how can we time our intervention so that we intervene when social cohesion is particularly under stress or under pressure? We've heard about how sometimes shifts in the national political context can create new pressure on social cohesion, and that can be a good time for intervention. But if we don't have the right sources of funding or the right setup, it can be hard to achieve. So given the time constraint, I'll stop here and turn over to you first, maybe Nessa first, and Siaka, and Lisa.
Sure. Thanks so much, Marine. This has been a really fascinating day, and I think I'm going to end up posing more questions than I have answers to in sort of reflecting on it. But I think that there's one thread that I'm going to attempt to draw a through line through that I've been thinking about all day. And I think it starts with this sort of the fact that we have a lot of definitional and conceptual plurality in this sphere. So as Jessica pointed out, we think more similarly than we maybe think we do. We're not that special. And so I think, like, on one hand, there's a huge amount of agreement amongst all of us about the things that we should be focused on, but those things are many. It's like a very long list of things that we care about that have to do with social cohesion. And I think because there are a lot, and thinking about my time sort of on the program application stage as more in previous roles that are more implementation focused than my current one, there was a bit of an impulse for me to kind of throw the kitchen sink in terms of outcomes at programs. So yes, this program will have impacts on trust and political participation and acceptance of diversity. And I think that maybe what we need to do is, instead of thinking about it as I think we maybe need to scale back a little bit, is part of my thinking, I think for a few ways. And so I think one is that we maybe project too much onto programs, and the second is it might be okay if programs have more limited outcomes and we sort of focus on the ones that we really want to move. And I think that this is where the sort of plurality of concepts is really helpful, because on one hand, we have this list of things that we can pull on, and on the other, we have particular programs that might identify or might push on those particular types of outcomes. And so from there, I think what we can do is sort of, well, I think there are three things that this makes me think about. One is sort of that the workshop and also many of the conversations we've had today kind of pointed out that we need to think a little bit more about the mechanisms. So like what are the particular behavioral pathways through which we expect a particular program to have impact on a very limited set of outcomes? The second is, and this is I think where we need to think about like theories of change a little bit more and how to push on particular outcomes. The second is I think that like thinking about this plurality and kind of choosing the outcome groups that are most relevant for programs is like what all of the conversations we've been having today about localization revolve around. And so if we can think about programs' outcomes in a bit more of a limited sense, I think that allows us to localize them a little bit more easily, because we can say, yes, through this particular behavioral pathway, we think this program might have an impact on acceptance of diversity. And maybe it's okay to be a bit more scaled back in our expectations there. And yeah, I think that maybe that's the third point, that there may be some value in moderating our expectations a little bit and sort of mapping these particular pathways. And I think that this is a challenge for those of us in the research community to kind of clearly draw out what the behavioral lessons are from research that can be applied across a lot of different types of programs. And I think that one of the reasons that it's important for us to do that is that measurement is really expensive. So like drilling down on particular outcome types is really needed. And I think that this is, the kitchen sink model does not serve us well when we need to pay to measure every single one of those outcomes. And so I also think that can return really unclear and disappointing results too, when we say, oh, we measured a battery of social cohesion outcomes and only one of them moved. Well, yeah, but because maybe we only thought that one of them would move based on the program design. And so I think we need to reel in our impulses to measure everything. And I think that requires making strategic choices. And I think some of that is the need to share with one another best practices about measuring particular outcome groups. And so that's where I think exchanges like this are really helpful. And I'm so curious for our own work to go back to the CRS toolkit and the World Bank Mercy Corps measurement of CDD programs to kind of think about where those common threads are. Because as Jessica again said, I think we have more similarities than differences in sort of how we're thinking about this, and think about, how to apply measurement in specific areas. And then I think one programming or conceptual frontier that I think we've kind of been circling around today is there have been a lot of examples of sort of multi-sectoral programming. So the CRS in Uganda, GIZ in Ankara, and I think that we, on one hand, are asking about the social cohesion impacts of those types of programs. So programs that may not be in sectors that are specifically peace building. So like as Lisa was pointing out earlier today, education or health. So on one hand, we're thinking about the social cohesion impacts of those programs, but also the impacts of those programs on social cohesion. And this is where I think that we need to do a little bit more conceptual mapping maybe about how to draw the particular behavioral links or like parse out the mechanisms for how we expect those programs to actually impact outcomes. And yeah, so one big question that comes up when thinking about the multi-sectoral programs are what are these behavioral pathways and what are these mechanisms? And the second is, and this was brought up by Selma, but are there small tweaks that we can make to programs in other sectors that could have really meaningful returns to social cohesion? So for instance, if you are designing a big infrastructure project and you plan to employ both refugees and hosts in a given community, are there ways that you can intentionally integrate them on work teams that actually might have an impact on social cohesion? For a program you're already going to run with exactly the same population in exactly the same place anyway. And maybe there are some of these like costless tweaks that we can make going forward. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. You know, I just would like to point up two things, even more. So, in the morning during my opening remark, I talked about that. The first thing is, in fact, the need for all of us to better understand the context. When it comes to deal with social cohesion, we need to better understand the context, because all our attitudes, all our activities, all our programs should be driven by the result of the analysis of the context. The second thing is, in fact, we are doing all this research for the communities. We want to come up with some result, with some thing that we can apply within the community to improve the situation. So if we don't involve them at the beginning, so I was so happy when some panelists were talking about these community-driven evaluation tools. So that means that our communities, they are living in this situation. They can better explain it than us because we are external people. They know the way they were living before the social cohesion, broken. So for me, that is very, very, very important. And when you go to the community, so they are very, very clever. They will give you the response you want. It depends on your question. It depends on the way you are behaving with them. If you spend time with the communities, they will explain to you. They will make the story of all these things. And that can help us as a researcher to be able, to have a good research plan and involving them. The other thing that I learned, and I was really consolidated in my ideas, is in fact this vertical social cohesion, meaning that what is the impact of our political aspect and all the administration on this social cohesion. When you ask people, some communities, they say, that have been years, we are asking just for a health center. We are not getting it, So the village nearby, because they have someone at the government level, so they have been given a health center. So we are creating some frustration like that because these communities, they don't have anyone at the communal level. They have a need, a social need that will not be satisfied. So if we have many examples like that within communities, how can we solve this issue? That's why putting also a focus on analyzing the vertical social cohesion is very, very important. So I will maybe keep here for time being. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I just want to say before sharing my final remarks that I have a friend who is joining remotely, and he texted me to say when we all came back online, the room seemed a lot looser, and I was thinking that was our own version of the alien invasion, the sort of shock, more kind of cohesive and friendly. Anyway, so I've been reflecting a little bit about how many, how much kind of expertise and research has gone into social cohesion, and yet it's not a coherent subsector. Necessarily, or it's not a coherent community, right? We have peace builders, and we have humanitarian actors and development actors, and And a lot of what we've talked about today is the intersectionality, or all of the ways that social cohesion intersects across all of these different sort of better established sectors. And I'm certainly not advocating for another kind of entity within our community, but I was thinking that, you know, for those of us working on social cohesion and passionate about it, thinking about all of the intersections that have come up today, that there's a few things I think that we can move towards, and other sort of trends in the broader space that we can latch onto in order to advance social cohesion work, have a broader reach with the types of outcomes we're seeking. And so there's sort of three kind of trends I identified that I think we can do, you know, continue to prove our relevance in these things, and sort of the effectiveness of social cohesion vis-a-vis these trends. And so the first is obviously just I don't know if you can call it a trend at this point, but the uptake of the triple nexus as a concept. And I think one opportunity we may have missed is peace building as a sector. Violence prevention can seem quite daunting, but social cohesion might be a more logical entry point for development and humanitarian workers who want to make a difference in these outcomes. And I was thinking that there's not a clear line between do no harm and conflict sensitivity and social cohesion, if you're looking at conflict sensitivity sort of fulsomely. And so what can we learn from lessons of integrating do no harm and conflict sensitivity across the spectrum, and apply that to social cohesion and move that needle forward? And I think that gets to a question you raised, I think one of the most important questions around scale, right? This is what provides us an opportunity, if not to scale, to reach more people, to, you know, replicate processes that work within other large integrated programs like you both mentioned, and to reach more people and achieve those outcomes. The second trend, and there's been a lot of talk about this, but I'm just going to name it as you know, DEI and localization. And obviously in the last few years, we've had a reawakening, or, you know, renewed conversations about how to do this better. And I think one thing that that social cohesion practitioners that we can and should do is make the case more about how social cohesion and the work around that is inextricably linked to DEI and localization. And doing that well is to advance both of those agendas, because it is inherently about inclusion at the individual level and at the group level. And so I think that's something that the social cohesion practice has a lot to offer, actually, in terms of not just that we need to localize, but also that the localization agenda can learn from what social cohesion practitioners have been doing. And then finally, sort of the third, again, I don't know if you can call this a trend, but sort of the increased investment and seriousness around rigorous evaluation and measurement. And social cohesion is just clearly a viable player in this space. There's been a lot of really rigorous mixed methods. We heard so many good examples of experiments and also kind of solid traditional mixed methods approaches to measuring here. And that if we don't continue to measure in different ways, maybe judiciously, as you mentioned, we do so at our peril, given the recognized importance of social cohesion as a resilience capacity, as something that is important to unlocking sort of other development outcomes. So those, I'll stop there with those.
Yeah, I think that I was thinking that the two panelists will talk about the learning. I think the learning aspect is very, very important. So I think that Ryan remember very well during this study I said that, okay, yes, that is for the research purpose, but what we need is something that the community can understand, that the government can understand and can apply to improve what they have been doing. So we need to put a great focus on learning. What we are, despite the research action, we need, in fact, to have this result in a way that they can be used by the beneficiary, the government, the communities, and so on, and have a kind of feedback to them. We come to the community, we have this research, the result need also to get back to them, and also in terms of way to improve their situation. Learning is important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first off, of course, as always, the Zoom breaking up was a completely planned intervention and social experiment, and we'll get back to you on the impact on different dimensions of social cohesion. Thank you so much for all your contribution. I think you made a lot of important points about, first of being brave enough to select indicators instead of like hedging ourselves by covering everything to make sure that something will turn out significant, and also about the potential of tweaking multi-sectoral approach, about the importance of taking the time, but also being open-minded enough in a way to let communities lead the process of selecting, designing intervention and measures, even if it might not fit with how we write proposal or with the usual process. Then Lisa, you covered a lot of things, but you talked in particular about building off what we've learned from the conflict-sensitive and do no harm approaches, and also about the fact that localization and DEI and social cohesion are inextricably linked, and that to do each well, actually, we need to do two of them together. So I haven't been doing a good job of keeping an eye on time, but I think this is a good point to turn to online questions that we might have, which doesn't seem like we have a lot of online questions.
Yeah, at the moment we don't have any online remarks. I see actually somebody just came in, Thais Nizam would like to have the floor, and so...
yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. The floor is yours. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, hi everybody. I was actually one of the panelists this morning, and I ran out of time, so I couldn't go into something that I wanted to talk about, but a few of your panelists have raised this issue of looking at social cohesion in sectors that aren't focused necessarily on social cohesion. And actually Lisa knows this very well, because we tried to work with Mercy Corps on this in Ethiopia. And Lisa, we haven't given up. We're still going to make it happen, and we're going to do it with you. I think we've got finally the government around to seeing it our way. But we're doing exactly what Salma was talking about earlier. She was saying that, why aren't we looking at this in livelihood projects? We're doing that in Ethiopia. We have a livelihood, we actually have a cash transfer project. That's a public works project that has a graduation element. And most of the project is in urban areas and rural areas, but ours is focusing also on extending the cash transfers to refugees. And we're doing something very simple, which is we have three types of work teams. We have refugee-only work teams, we have host-only work teams, and we have work teams that have refugees working with hosts. And we're looking to see if there is any impact on social cohesion. And we're doing this all over Ethiopia, and the refugee contexts in different bits of Ethiopia, as some of you know, are very different. And we're starting to pilot this in a part of Ethiopia where, in the Somali region, where the hosts and the refugees come from a similar ethnic background. As Alfredo mentioned earlier, we've just done the baseline, so we'll see once the project begins implementation what will be the impact. And also I wanted to mention something else that a few people had raised, which was the issue of identity. When we were doing our baseline and we were thinking about identity, I wanted to ask this question for particularly the Somali region, but also later in other regions of Ethiopia, whether identity for a Somali, for somebody from a Somali ethnic background, but who's an Ethiopian citizen, whether they identify more strongly with the Ethiopian, with their national identity, or they identified more strongly with their ethnic identity. But we were told that that was a very, obviously a political question, and they didn't want us to include it. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Thais. No, and I think the project you're talking about is a good example of what Nessa was talking about taking a multi-sectoral, like public works intervention that was going to happen anyway and making tweaks to to change social cohesion outcome or see if it makes a difference. So I think I now want to turn it over to everybody in the room, see if you have any closing remarks. You can address some of the questions we raised earlier, but also any other points that you think is important and that we didn't get a chance to cover today yet.
I just wanted to make two really quick remarks and a food for thought, I guess. One, I come from the Mr. Rogers tradition. I do want to assure everyone that you are very special. I don't want that to be my takeaway message of today. But second, one of the areas that, and I apologize, I know I was only here part of the time with you all, but one of the things I think is really important in these conversations as well, in terms of both where we go and where we're at, is where the donors are and how and what role they play within this. Because, Ness, I heard you, we throw the kitchen sink at things sometimes from both, I think, older traditions of plant 1,000 flowers, see what bloom, but also the need to show something for what is often a highly accountable system of, some sort of financial transaction. So I think also bringing them along, both for capacity building, for having these conversations on how we do more targeted programming, how we limit some of those things, how we better define what we're looking to change, is really critical to make sure that that's accompanying us and we're not just speaking. I think most of us are in agreement on this, but how do we keep the funding coming too, unfortunately plays a difficult trade-off for many of these.
Yeah, I don't really have a response, but this is a very important point. I don't know if anybody else has other remarks. Oh yeah, Irina.
Yes, there is one additional online request from Bertha. If we do have the time, I'd like to give the floor to her.
Yeah, I think that's good. We take one more remark and then.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, of course, maybe we can take the online comment first and then.
Yes, we can see you, and I think we can.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you all for just such a rich discussion, presentations with such rich insights, and I came in to learn and reflect on my own previous experience in development. I just wanted to point out the importance of context and follow up on Siaka's intervention on that point. As I listened to the presentations, the big thing for me, especially coming from the Global South, especially from Kenya, an African country, is the political context. A lot of the community development work we do, even if it is everyday peace and even if it is at the local level, we have to constantly confront the fact that the work is embedded within a political context. And so in my previous work, one of the big questions was constantly wondering what of the political context needs to change for this work to sustain itself, or for the people at that level to sustain their work and their capacities for the long term. So I just wanted to raise that. And I think it was touched on in a number of presentations. One especially that stood out for me was the whole trend towards authoritarianism. But I also want to bring it a much broader context in terms of the political context, because at the end of the day, the communities we are working with are within that kind of a context. Thank you.
Siaka, do you want to respond?
No, but I think that it is just a comment. So, in fact, that is where maybe the donors, they have more power than we, and like NGO, we have no power to impose something on to politicians in our country. But in terms of the donors, like the World Bank and the IFAD and so on, they can put that in their conditionalities, something like that. Because we know that all these problems we are living in West Africa, maybe in also some part of the world, it is most of the time some political issue, like I just say right now, and also the lady also to confirm that. So that where maybe the donor can do something. But we have the information, being close to the communities. We are in fact giving that information to donors. They can also think on how they can help to stabilize, or in fact to have some conditionality on that side. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I mean, I think this is a good point. There's only so much that can be done in a given political context. At the same time, earlier, Julia talked about how a deteriorated social context is something that authoritarian can exploit. And so maybe a contribution, even if it's a limited contribution, is by trying to slow down or prevent the deterioration of social cohesion, then you're contributing. I mean, you're also preventing the broader deterioration of the political context. So I think, Nines, you wanted to make a point, and then I think it will be a good time for us to conclude.
Thank you. No, it's just really as an outsider, as of being a fly in the wall in this topic. It's this completely different topic, new topic for me. And as I listen to all of you talk, I commend you all for your courage to tackle such a very complex cause, and just to have that evidence-based information or knowledge that you need to be able to put this agenda to the governments for action is something that is really ambitious, and you only need really good leaders to help you, good governance, good leaders, brave people to really to influence the right people, the right stakeholders. And also, I noticed about the data. I can understand how data could be so important. Harmonizing data is something that could be a challenge, because you can't aggregate things when they're apples and oranges. So I guess that's one challenge, which I know you know already, and I still commend you for even attacking the problem too. And also validation of the data too, because there's a lot of information, but there might be information you can't use to be able to back up your research. So again, it's another challenge that I commend you for wanting to take on, and just really advancing in this theme. So thank you very much. And I really apologize for the hiccup today, but I'm happy that it gave some energy that you probably didn't think you had. So, thank you.
Yeah, and also I want to thank Donovan, who's been running the technology for us today, because it's hard to do for a hybrid event, and he also really saved the day with a new. I think this is a good place to conclude. I want to thank everybody. I definitely learned a lot today, and there are a lot of questions that were raised that I know I'm going to keep thinking about. So at the end of our morning sessions, Irina talked a little bit about how we may share resources. So there's a social cohesion hub. There is also this page that we are going to put online with recording of today's presentations, possibly with the slides. We'll check with presenters first, with some of the synthesis and report we've mentioned. If you have any report tools, things you've posted in the chat or not that you would like to see on this page, please email us and we'll add them. And if there are resources that you've seen that seemed interesting, where you can reach out to the person who talked about them, that might be a first way to get at them. But you can also let us know, and we'll see if we can add them to this page. So that's for practical aspects. And then more generally, I hope that today has been an opportunity to reinvigorate our exchanges, so that we can continue building off our respective contribution, and so that when we work, we know that there is this like vast expertise that we can potentially draw upon as we work on this challenge, which is one of the most difficult but also interesting challenge of development. And I'll stop here. Thanks, everyone.